site program. And they got rid of the liquid above ground waste, but they didn't clean up anything in the ground or lead or asbestos like solid hazardous waste. So we'll start with removing the solid hazardous waste, and then there's been environmental work done since 1998 on the site. So they poked a lot of holes, put in a lot of wells. They know the site is generally pretty clean. For a pulp mill site, that's amazing. Like, I've worked at 3 other pulp mills, and usually the groundwater looks like coffee or tea, and that's dioxin contamination, which is some most toxic stuff on the planet and very persistent. So, you know, this site is, you know, credit to the people who operated it. It's cleaner than most every other pulp site. But that doesn't mean that it's clean. We're fully expecting to find surprises in the ground. You can poke holes, but you can't poke them everywhere. So we know there's not a site-wide contamination problem, but there's bound to be stuff here and there, especially like under foundations where it's hard to poke holes and put straws. But once we break ground, that's all Nordic's responsibility. Where right now the original owner still has some of the monitoring and remediation responsibilities in the ground. But luckily, most of the contamination that they're actively remediating is outside of our lease area. So.
Can you recycle these bricks? Is that what they're made
We can use that for ground densification as well.
Yeah.
So they're tile-lined tanks, and that's because the chemicals used in the pulp making process are so corrosive. That was the most resistant material that lasted the longest. But that's why this was an imminent disaster before the EPA came in, is that the chemicals were actually eating their way out of the tanks, and they would have ended up in the ground in the bay eventually if somebody didn't come and take care of it.
Wow, those are cool.
Yeah. When Sierra Pacific sold, they kept responsibility for the ground contamination, but transferred liability for all the above ground process chemicals, and then the last owner basically disappeared in the night with nobody you can go after monetarily, and that's how it ended up in the Superfund site. That's where there's nobody who's...
I'm thinking. I like it.
New countertops there, Jerry.
Probably don't want to eat out for them.
I'm thinking that too.
Yeah, we can keep walking.
What the cats want.
One of like the new biometrics they have.
That building's staying. Our buildings are quite large. So, like the grow-out buildings, which are on the north and south side of our campus. So it'll start 50 feet from that building and then go all the way down past that water tank. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the buildings, but they're much lower profile. So they're about 55 feet tall at the maximum. For reference, that's a 270-foot smokestack, 12-story building. So we're going to densify the site significantly, but also bring down the visual impact. With the hills you can see over there are the ash landfills. So originally when this was built, they had a wood-fired boiler system with a 100-foot smokestack, and through that process they created a lot of ash, and that's what those landfills are. So most people don't really see the site because it's kind of hidden behind that when you're close to it. So people just assume it's been cleaned up, you know. The EPA came in, right? Like, that site's clean, right? So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do, but those ash landfills actually are a benefit to us. We were required to look at the 800-year tsunami event, which isn't a very large event, but we chose to look at the 2,500-year event, which is a very large event and would overtop the entire peninsula. But through that modeling, we had it done by Gary Chalk, who's the lead of the, sorry, this is a long one, American Society of Civil Engineers, Seismic and Tsunami Subcommittee. So he writes the rules that all the other engineers in the country follow. So he is the foremost expert on this subject, but he did a giant modeling effort for us. And those ash landfills actually provide a lot of protection to the site because they're not overtopped during an event like that. But we do have a lot of design features built in to prepare for that 2,500-year event. We weren't required to design for that, but that is what we're designing to. And some of those are grounding the building corners to help water move around the building, having downturned shear key walls, which are concrete walls. They go into the ground around the entire building and in a honeycomb under the building. And that's because in an event like the one we modeled, 15 feet of material could disappear, so scouring 15 feet down. So those walls protect our foundation from getting undermined. So even if 15 feet of material disappeared, our foundations would still be solid under our buildings. Fish would still be in the tanks, but we wouldn't be able to operate. There'd be no road out here. We'd be on an island. We wouldn't have power. We wouldn't have natural gas.
But you have fish.
But you'd have food.
If your boat floats, you can have as many as you want. Come on out. But that's what we designed for, is that, you know, in an event like that, everything would still be in the tanks. We have a vertical evacuation place for our employees where they'd be on the roof, watching that come in, which would be terrifying. But in a large earthquake event like that, we can't guarantee we can get the people off the peninsula in time. We don't know if the bridges are intact. We don't know if there's a traffic jam. It's much safer for them to get up on the roof in a building that's over-engineered specifically for that purpose. And we've also, you know, told the community that there'll be an external staircase that's going to be open to the public. You know, if there's a tsunami event, you live out here, come on down, because, you know, the other alternative is just to run up to the top of the biggest sand dune. Those are the tsunami evacuation points out here right now. And talk about terrifying. You know, there's a little deck on top of a sand dune, and that's your tsunami evacuation point. Yeah, I'd rather be on an over-engineered building personally.
Yeah, and that has come up in Nordic as, you know, people are already asking, like, well, what's the plan? Well, you know, let the buildings be built, and then there will be plans. But Nordic will definitely be part of the community, and that will be part of the overall evacuation plan for the whole region. So it will be all official and set up, you know, at some point. Hopefully nobody ever needs to go up on the roof for that.
Do you foresee any issues with seawater rise or sea level rise? Would that affect this site?
So that was something we had to look at. The site is actually higher than a lot of the rest of the peninsula. We're at about 20 feet right here. So through the ground densification process, we'll probably raise it up a couple more feet because of all the material we're putting down into the ground. But we did look at that. We were required to look at the 2100 sea level predictions from the Coastal Commission, and we're fine here. But lots of other places on the peninsula can't say the same thing. Just a few feet make a big difference.
So what about the transportation of the fish out of the facilities to ship it over truck roadway over 299 and down 101 type of thing?
Yeah, well the fish will be shipped fresh the same day that it's harvested, and that would be entirely by truck.
Yeah.
So our market is the 50 million people that live on the West Coast. So that's the entire West Coast out to like Las Vegas. And you know, we would probably be doing the first leg of that, but then it would get into a refrigerated distribution system and get put on trucks with other refrigerated goods, you know. So we wouldn't be doing all the way to the consumer. It'd probably just be to a distribution hub, but that's as yet to be seen in the marketing plan.
In theory, how many trucks would be heading each direction daily? Harvesting daily,
Man, we looked at this closely. I want to say that it was 75 to 90 trucks a week. So, you know, it's a few a day. We'd have a few trucks coming in with feed and a few trucks leaving with fish. But yeah, not a significant increase to what's already out here. I mean, people were scared that that's a big increase, but I mean, there's hundreds of chip trucks that come every day, and there's tons of log trucks that come every day. When this pulp mill was in operation, they had 400 truckloads of pulp coming in a day. So that's what the infrastructure was built for and can accommodate.
Are you having to do any improvement to the outfall line?
No, the outfall's in good shape. So
how far does it run out?
Well, originally they dumped right on the shoreline. We have historical photos of black plumes right on the coast. public outcry, they put in a half-mile extension voluntarily. I don't know exactly when that was, but then in the early 90s, the surf riders sued successfully and got them to put in a mile extension with a diffuser array. So now it's a mile and a half offshore, and it ends in a 144 port diffuser array, and those are 2-inch ports spread 14 feet apart. So it really spreads everything out over a big area in 80 feet of water offshore. And our numerical modeling says everything goes back to background within 5 feet of that diffuser array. So there's 75 feet of water between.
Somebody's been out there and inspected all too?
Yeah, the Harbor District is the one that manages that infrastructure, and they do a diving inspection, I think, every other year because there's some zinc anodes they have to replace, and they jet sand away from the ports, and they, I think, flow water through it to push sand out, inspect all the connections. There's, I think, 3 different sections, so 2 different connectors for the pipeline segments, and these all get inspected every other year by divers.
Didn't it get relined probably 18, 20 years ago? I know it collapsed, and then they actually relined it. They had divers in there. And
yeah, my dad was involved with installing the mile extension.
but it got relined.
So I know stories about that.
It collapsed. It was a huge deal because your
sure
outflow
that
for
was
2
this
million
one?
gallons a day, like that, So they shut the pulp mill down.
I think that was the other one. Yeah, I think there's 2 outfall pipes, and one's in bad shape, and it does have a liner, and sometimes it gets exposed in the surf. So that's how I've seen it. Somebody called me once, like, I can see your pipeline in the surf line right now, and I was like panicking, and it wasn't ours. It was the other one. It was down farther. But yeah, I don't think this one's been lined because they got an ROV stuck in it when they were installing it, a remote operated vehicle. So there's a remote operated vehicle and a tether somewhere in that pipeline, so you couldn't line it. It would get stuck at some point. Yeah, but I've seen the other one. It has a liner, but I don't think this one ever collapsed.
Thought it did.
What do you mean? Yeah, so one of our biggest expenses, except for electricity, is fish food. So the food conversion rate for salmon is incredible. So at our operating farms, it's 1.04, 1.05. So you put 1.05 pounds of food in the tank, and you get a pound of fish, which is mind-boggling. With chicken, it's like 2 to 4, I think, and then cows, it's like 6 to 10. So as far as animal protein, it's one of the most efficient food conversion ratios. But at the peak of production, we'll be producing 28,000 metric tons of fish a year. So that means we're bringing in about 30,000 metric tons of fish a year.
And what is that?
The biggest producers right now are in British Columbia, but this is an emerging industry. So, there'll probably be feed mills getting set up, but it's these feed mills aren't just doing fish feed, they're doing other animal feeds as well. But yeah, the biggest producers right now are up in Canada because that's where there are fish farms right now. But yeah, there's 3 main producers, Reading, Cargill, and I'm facing the 3rd one that they all use certified fish meal, so it's coming from a sustainable fishery and not, going and stealing all the fish from some other fish. But most of that fish meal is coming from fish trimmings. So, for human consumption, you cut up the fish, and then what's left is great for making fish meal. So, the Chinese take a little different tack in how they get their fish meal, and they just go and pull everything out they can get in a net and grind it up and feed it to the fish in their fish farms. We don't think that's ethical or appropriate because it's totally unsustainable. But that's, there's a lot of bad actors in the industry, and we think it makes sense to bring everything stateside, get under the FDA, get under the USDA, have everything completely traceable and transparent. You know where the feed's coming from. They were never given antibiotics or other treatments. And you can, have a lot of assurance. And,
And just to kind of further on what Scott was saying, there are a lot of bad practices, as we know, like in any industry. And so some, people hear about things and then they automatically assume, oh, that must be what Nordic is doing. And it hasn't been. And so there were some recent concerns brought about fish meal and those practices. And, and that's definitely not how Nordic does things. So I think what's really important is just if you hear something and you have a concern or you know somebody that does, it's just really direct them to me so that I can help them get the actual answers to the questions. That's been, I think, one of the most successes of those open Zooms we were talking about earlier. If there's people that are just opposed, they're opposed and they're not going to show up to have those conversations. But we've had a lot of folks show up with a list of questions, and it's been really fun for me to just watch the team. We know about all that, and that's not what we do, and that's why we're doing things this way. So because there have been a lot of bad practices, it just automatically gets associated with Nordic. And so I think it's just important to keep, just bring the questions, even if it's something that's been answered 20 times, that's okay. We want to keep answering it, and just really so that Nordic can separate themselves again and again and explain, no, that's why they're doing what they're doing, is to combat against all those bad practices. So still a lot of confusion, but we just keep educating. So.
Yeah, it is the most fun in those meetings when somebody comes in like hot, and then by the
Yeah.
end they're like, "This is great. I totally support this."
Yeah,
And they do not shy away from the hard questions, not at all. They almost like bring it. So, 'cause
Yeah.
I've been on a couple where there was some really intense questions. So
Yeah,
I
and
think I
for
asked
me,
a few myself.
like just as a liaison, like I said, I'm not an employee. I'm here to like be that the intermediary. But that's also, it's important that I also can get behind the project, or I wouldn't still be doing it. So it's nice for me too when I'm like, oh, I hear those questions coming in, and then I see the really great answers and the enthusiasm in the transparency and the answers. It makes me feel good about it for our community.
Well, we're like 7:55. If people wanted to hang around longer, we can walk over to the docks, and I can show you where one of the seawater intakes would be. Or if there's just a couple more questions here, we can do that. It's totally
So
up to you
shipping
guys.
is not a possibility at all?
Shipping?
Yeah.
Shipping fish?
Oh, we have looked at possibly barging in food, bringing in like a barge load of food and materials. There is the dock. I've seen a piece of heavy equipment on the dock, and the amount it moves around gave me some pause. So we need to do some assessments on, how sturdy that thing is. But one of the problems is that we can't guarantee year-round consistency. Like right now, the oceans are flat. Great time to bring things in and out of the bay, but during the winter, that bay entrance is a nightmare. So yeah, it's something we're looking at, but it's not something we're set on for any part of the business. Yep, for sure.
I will.
And so you guys, you're free, like if you have time, we can keep going. If you need to go back to the office and get your stuff and go, we left it all unlocked, so whatever works for you.